Let's do a little
4,
exercise.
1,
Element 115, essentially non-existent.
3, 4.
And he told police he was able to time travel because aliens filled his body with, you guessed it, alcohol.
See?
Boys!
I'm ready to
miss
fill
you
this
guys.
up. Miss you guys too.
Ready to-
What is it?
ready to
Day
fill
900
this
of the
up.
pandemic?
Oh,
Dude,
it's
this
day
pandemic,
900.
man.
They're barely alive.
Should we be wearing masks?
Fuck.
I feel like we've been
Forgot my
pretty
mask.
close in this chat.
Yeah.
Forgot my. I know. I'm like an inch away from you. I feel like I can just reach out and touch you.
It would
I
be
wish I could.
would be setting a good example.
You know, as a
right?
professional COVID coordinator, please don't touch anybody.
Has that gone to
What
your
if I-
head? Is that?
A little bit. I like the power.
What if this gets out? And this
What if
video
what
of you
gets out?
the video of you maskless.
I know.
Ooh, that'd be quite a
shit,
scandal.
dude.
Be hours at a time of you without your mask on.
Mm.
That would be the fucking scandal of the last 4 years.
Yeah,
I
right.
think
Nothing.
that's-
That's
Nothing has
a
happened.
very
in the last 4
contentious
years.
statement, to say the least.
Mitch, you maskless bastard.
You know, that's honestly not the worst thing anyone has ever called me.
Yeah, it'd be weird if it was. It'd be so weird if it was.
He just starts crying. I feel horrible. I feel so
Yeah.
bad.
It's the worst thing anyone's ever called if he
I thought it
breaks
was an
down.
obvious joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not.
I'm John Stenning. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say. Sorry, I was just gonna say I'm not good enough at improv to follow through on like a joke like that. So
It's okay. You just work on it.
yeah,
Yes,
I'll get better.
yes, and?
There you go.
Hey, what's your name?
I'm John Stenning.
I'm Jarvis.
I'm Mike.
Yeah, I'm Mitch.
And we are the Beastie Boys, no relation.
With a
Welcome
Y.
to another episode with a Y of the show. Today, in a little bit, we are going to talk about Kaiju. But that's just a little tease because at first, we're going to talk about some current events, some hot button topics.
We got hot takes coming at you.
Oh,
It's
boy.
the
events
news.
For us
It's-
when we're recording this, but not necessarily current events for you while you're listening to this.
Right, because we are recording these well in advance.
We
Yeah.
time travel every episode.
Right, we
We're
time
recording
travel
this in
around.
1923.
Yeah.
So, heads up.
But we got we did some Googling here in 1923. We came up with some news articles. We're just gonna go over them. Yeah, it's sort of it's current events. Current events in terms of wherever we are in the time stream currently.
I
Yeah.
might be dating myself, but do you guys remember Current Affair on TV when they had like big triangle and it go?
I do remember Current
I have vague memories of that.
Yeah.
I
dude.
also wish I could date myself. You say you might be dating yourself. Imagine that. Wow. I'm just
Yeah. Well, maybe when
just
clones,
you know.
when CRISPR, they get a handle on CRISPR, maybe one day we can clone ourselves and take ourselves out on a date. It would be such a low maintenance date. It would be great.
Mm.
You,
Yeah,
know,
but I
you would know everything.
I feel like it would be more problems.
Why?
Because why would you ever like deal with any of your own bullshit?
That's a good
I
point.
Yeah,
feel like I
yeah,
hate
that's a good point. You
myself
know
too
all your own
much.
bullshit.
Yeah,
you would
I'd
end
be-
up killing you would end up killing your other self.
No,
Yeah.
I don't know that we would.
I
Fight
would.
like that, but we'd probably just like cry, yell at each other. Just be like, "Why did you do that? You knew that was the wrong decision." You know, and it'd be like, "Why do you always do this to yourself?" Like
Yeah.
that's just not to ruin the dream.
See, you guys go too far, man. I just want
The
to.
sex would probably be great. The sex would probably be great.
Definitely,
Hell yeah.
you would know
You'd
all
know what
your
you want.
spots.
Yeah, it'd be great.
It'd be like those kung fu movies where they're like equals and they're just hitting like blocking. out,
But
It's
then
funny because
I was gonna say, on
Mitch
the other
said-
hand, would you pick out all your flaws too during sex? So like, would you see all?
I do
your
it already.
shitty, embarrassing. Yeah, you just catch it all.
yeah.
How do you
Mitch
guys
said
have time?
that we went too far, and then
Yeah.
then Mike said he'd have sex with himself.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was-
Well, no,
how it
that's.
happened.
I think that's going even further. I just want a
Yeah.
clone. I just want a clone of myself to play video games with, man.
Fair. That's a good call, dude.
You know,
I'm
I
into that.
miss, especially during this whole pandemic thing. I'm really missing like the couch co-op thing. You know.
Mhm.
So I'm missing it. I just wish I had another maid to like hook up another controller and play Street Fighter with or something.
Yeah, and
know
get
what?
hand stuff. What?
Street Fighter.
Fair.
No comment.
He said Street Fighter, not Meat Fighter, Jarvis.
Sorry.
Technically, you can do both with a joystick.
He wasn't talking about Lonely Man's Atari, Jarvis. He wasn't
mashing-
talking about the Skin Arcade, Jarvis.
Oh.
That's all I got.
Ooh, imagine an
Yeah.
arcade cab just wrapped with human flesh.
I
Ugh.
bet you it has happened. I bet you in the serial killer boom of the 70s and 80s that took off. That's the fucking, what's the mythical arcade game?
Polybius.
It's
Yes.
Plebeius. The actual Plebeius is human skin.
Ooh,
Yeah,
gross.
Buffalo Bill made it.
An arcade, it's just like the Necronomicon.
Full circle, because
You know?
he would fuck himself.
Right.
Right?
Right, fuck me.
All right, we're
Would you fuck
connecting
me?
dots that shouldn't be connected right
There
now.
we go. Anyway,
This
in
might
the
get us
news-
canceled, guys.
In the news, Mitch
the
has
news.
been
What do you
sending
got?
stuff to the chat because
Yeah.
he's just a wonderful guy, and I would also like a clone of him
Thank
to
you.
play video games with.
Me
but
too.
this CNN article, this is like the shit that I feel
CNN.
this legitimizes any of the bullshit that we are interested in that makes even a little bit of sense, because this article called Antarctic Fossil Could Have Been the Biggest Flying Bird Ever, study finds. So basically they're outlining in the 80s, these paleontologists from the University of California, Riverside visited this island in the Antarctic Peninsula, and they brought home a bunch of fossils, 1980s, including the foot bone and the partial jawbone of two prehistoric birds. For decades, these fossils they brought back sat in a museum at the University of California, Berkeley. So you
Just
bring
Like
back
archive.
you bring back this skull, these fossils, like the biggest flying bird ever. And in the 80s, you know what bones are. It's not like they're lacking technology. Maybe they can't date it,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
still, you're looking at this shit that's real. You're a scientist. You should kind of know what this is. You bring it back, and then it just hangs out for 25 years or more than that. This was in the 80s. This dude, this graduate student, started poking around in 2015. So they have these, so it's that 35 years if it was 1980. They have these bones sitting. The people that brought them back probably fucking retired or at least moved on with their life.
And just completely.
Yeah.
And now
forgot
there's
about
this
'em.
crazy thing that's could have been the biggest flying bird ever.
Right.
Right?
Well, how? Yeah,
So
that's weird.
This is all the shit, like, and people will say, like, well, they found giant bones, and this is evidence that they found giant bones, not necessarily giant humanoid like a Sasquatch
yeah.
or like angels descended, but they found this evidence. They brought it back to a university who should be like, oh shit, all the stuff we paid for, let's get something out of
Right.
it. But no, they sat in a warehouse or a library or somewhere in a box in a cabinet for 30 years before
that sounds
somebody
like a
goes-
waste
Dude,
of funding.
and it was
there's
and
so
somebody
much
was
of
just
that
screwing
shit.
around. So there could be like Bigfoot bones. Jesus' foot could be somewhere.
Jesus' actual foot.
His foot. Somebody, but you know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This isn't like undiscovered stuff. Like all the Bigfoots could have been murdered, and there could have been a Bigfoot genocide that we never heard about. And there's evidence sitting in a warehouse in the Smithsonian somewhere.
Just bullet riddled bodies.
And this isn't even like probably somebody didn't cover this up. This could have just been they couldn't get the money to send it out to a lab. No one was interested for whatever reason. But this just shows how easily this happens and how normalized it is.
Yeah.
You know, much less something that you would like. Maybe one of these people published a book that this would make not verifiable anymore. You know what I mean? And then they're going to lose income or something. Maybe that happened. But odds are this is just no follow through. Something happened. So this for me is like enough evidence to say almost anything is possible, and it could even be like not even undiscovered, just sitting in a box.
Yeah.
And it's like you got to go through all the boxes before you tell me there's no evidence of gnomes.
No evidence of no.
Little gnome skeleton hiding
Yeah,
out in the
they're
back of an
way
archive.
You ever see one of those creepy videos on the internet where it's like gnome sightings, and it's just like some really grainy cell phone footage from like 2002 of some dude just filming, like he's filming the doorway in his house, and then there's just like this shitty little obviously CGI garden gnome that's all grainy, and he peeks around the corner and then he runs away. If not, that's a real video that's out there. You gotta find it. It's hysterical.
And that thing's skeleton could be sitting in a warehouse up at
Yeah.
California, Berkeley.
Or in an Ed Gein style workshop out back. It could go either way, I feel like. With something like that, if you find a gnome, you could
I
also
don't know.
probably find it.
I think the only place that thing skeleton is sitting is in like Blender or Daz 3D or whatever the fuck those 3D modeling programs
Maya.
are nowadays. Yeah, Maya, Autodesk Maya. That's where that thing's skeleton is.
Well, that's badass. That opens up some potential cool stories. If they
Gnomes
ever-
are real.
Did it say in the article if they were studying them now, currently?
Yeah, that's how they found out that the
Yeah, so they're-
bird
so
was
they're-
that big.
okay,
Because people
renewing it.
can see that they can make money on it at the lead, or it's like,
Gotcha.
oh wow, this is an amazing thing.
Mm.
Like, what's in the next drawer is what I want to know.
Yeah.
That's going to
Yeah,
be my
dude.
question forever. What was next to that the other team brought back? The unnameable, like
Just a
everyone
stack
that's everyone
It's just
that's
a
opened the
stack-
door has gone like insane. You know, they look,
Yeah, yeah.
"Oh."
It's just a box of old VHS tapes that they found. They somehow discovered while they were searching for this giant bird.
Just
And it
your
could
dad's
be.
porn.
Yeah, yeah,
Your
it's an
dad's
old-
porn.
old
Why is
ass
this in the
VHS.
drawer next to the pterosaurs? Weird.
They're doing
Yeah,
it,
so CNN, wow. I mean, I have a very legitimate source myself, and it is Local 12 out
Nice.
of, I wish it was Breitbart, but no, it's out of Oklahoma. It's like Channel 12 out of Sapulpa, Oklahoma. And
Wait, the pod
this-
racer?
Yeah, Sapulpa.
Sapulpa. Article's actually about Oklahoma as well. That's funny.
Oh, well, this article is about ghosts. Specifically, paranormal investigators capture ghostly activity at burger joint. So
Oh yeah.
this is a video of 4 people sitting around a bar, which doesn't look like it's had any people in it because of the terrible times that we're living in. And 2 of them have masks on, 2 of them don't, and they're sitting there, and the lights flicker. And this was news in Sapulpa, Oklahoma. Family-owned Dick's on 66 in Sapulpa captured a few spooky videos while there. These paranormal investigators. Multiple orbs were captured on the cameras. Now, these videos were not available. They did not show those. They only showed the security cam footage of these people sitting around and lights flickering, a couple of orbs.
So the investigators were there drinking, or they came after the fact?
No, so they after reports from the owners that the lights were
Okay.
flickering and that they saw
right.
some things, they hired these 2 investigators. The investigators came, they recorded some stuff. There's like recordings that include people saying, "Ethel," or "I can leave. I told you not to whisper."
Oh boy, all the classic
Floating
stuff.
around,
Yeah.
standing in front of in front of this like dining room. So any sort of publicity you can get for your diner in times like these, when restaurants are struggling. Then,
Oh yeah.
Mm.
Let's get another couple mask people in.
head on down to Dick's on 66.
Were there any
Sapulpa.
stories, any theories on like where the ghost could have come from? Like was it someone who died of COVID from that restaurant, or was
I actually think it's the ghost of all the burgers that they cooked.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say
It's all
I'd
the
like
cows.
I'd like to make a callback to our intellectual discussion I believe we had on this show about whether farts are ghosts, if you remember.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that place is probably haunted as shit. Literally.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Absolutely perfect.
I like that
So,
they're
yeah.
bipartisan, so like half masks, half no masks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they kept
Like
it
they
split
bring-
right down the middle.
Everyone's
safe.
coming together at Dick's.
All right, well, is that it for your article, John?
Yeah, that's what I have.
So mine also takes place in Oklahoma, like yours.
Lovely.
But it's a little bit
Great
different.
state.
Yeah, apparently.
Panhandle. It's got a panhandle.
It does. It
Say-
looks like a pot.
Is it Sanakin, Oklahoma? Because I'm walking out.
Oh my
Sanikin.
God. It's Bangor, Oklahoma.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I'm trying to look real quick. I don't even think it says the town on here. It just says Oklahoma. So a gas station, a soon to open gas station in Oklahoma, has already succeeded in making a big impression on passing motorists thanks to its massive Sasquatch, a 30-foot tall Sasquatch statue looming over the site. They dubbed it the
Damn.
Gas Squatch. The enormous depiction of the famed cryptid is reportedly the brainchild of Phil Silva. He quoted saying, "The monstrous statue is so huge," he says, if you go south, you can probably see him for over a mile. So
Hell
I don't
yeah.
know about you guys, but I think we just made 2 more stops on our road trip.
Yeah.
When COVID ends, because I need to see this Gasquatch, especially
hell
if you
yeah.
can see it a mile away.
I like how they're like, it's so huge, but it's also 30 feet tall. Like, that's very, that's, I mean,
I mean,
you can
it's
see it
large,
from far away,
but,
but it's,
you know,
but it's so reasonable, you know,
Yeah.
like you can understand what 30 feet is pretty easily.
Yeah.
I want to
So
watch.
yeah, go ahead.
I want to watch a show or a documentary on the guy who grew up in the shadow of the Sasquatch.
Oh my god! In about 30 years, when that kid grows up.
We lived a quarter mile from that gas station.
I don't see what town it is in this article. It doesn't say it, unfortunately, but I will do a little more digging and find.
We'll just
out.
drive around the whole state.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. I mean, if you can see it from a mile away, we'll probably come. I mean, Oklahoma's not that big, right?
No,
I mean, no. I mean, especially the
Third-
skinny panhandle, but that part's skinny.
third smallest state.
He's the protector
Yeah.
of the panhandle. They just have him at like the very end of it, and he protects you. Protects the panhandle.
Like the
I like how,
statues
like-
in Lord of the Rings.
Dude, I can't wait till a tornado rips through Oklahoma and that sign ends up in fucking Rhode Island. Just one day you wake up and it's just been blown into your backyards. Big giant
I love this.
Gasquatch.
Wow, that'd be a wild.
That would be wild. I mean, they do get a lot of
2,500 miles or something crazy like that.
launches it into space.
it's
That
quite
would
a
have to be
tornado.
a category F-150.
That's a big ass truck.
Yeah, man.
It would be fun to turn that Sasquatch into a like a spaceship, like Dr. Evil does with the Bob's Big Boy, and just the 4 of us can become cryogenically frozen, flying around space in the giant Sasquatch. What do you think?
You know,
that'd be
that
fun.
sounds like it would be the fucking best for a kaiju battle.
That's good. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nice, dude.
Yeah.
See what you did there. If this thing could come to life, I would put all my money on the Gasquatch. At least taking down quite a few kaiju.
I mean, the name alone is intimidating.
Yeah. You can only wonder what his ultimate attack is.
Right.
Ugh, what would Sasquatch's farts smell like?
Ghosts.
Awful.
Oh, yeah, I can
The
imagine.
ghosts of elk.
That's why Skunk Ape is like, Skunk Ape is Skunk Ape because he just smells awful.
Stank.
Yeah.
That's why my
Hello.
nickname is Skunk Ape.
I get a little Bigfoot funk going on today.
Yeah, that's what happens when you're in quarantine for this long.
You know who I bet knows a shitload about kaijus, which is our topic for today? Our good old buddy Mitch.
Hey,
oh,
that's
shit.
me.
Let's get on to this Mitch Minute.
All right. Okay, cool. So wait, let me just adjust in
he's
my
sitting
seat
up.
a little bit here, while I give you a nice lore dump on the term kaiju and its relation to Japanese mythology and, by extension, mythology from all over the world. So kaiju comes from the Chinese word guaishou, which can be translated as meaning strange beast. So here's the deal. So kaiju, as we kind of use it today to refer to giant monsters, that's honestly just a thing that comes from movies. There's no myths and legends in Japan or in China or anywhere else where they use kaiju to exclusively refer to giant monsters. So that's just a movie term that comes from the 1950s. But there's a little more to it than that, though. So don't just dismiss it right now. So the Japanese language borrowed the Chinese writing system to use. And so the Chinese root word guaishou, which is kaiju, is pretty much the Japanese pronunciation of that word, right? It refers to various mythological creatures that we would pretty much describe as like your average mythological monster these days and ages. So the root word of guaishou can be traced back as early as what's known as the Shanhai Jing in Chinese, which is a book called The Classic of Mountains and Seas, and that was written like way back in the day, like in the BCs. And basically, it's just like a collection of strange mythological creatures. So when Japan borrowed the Chinese writing system, they started using that word, guaishou, which became kaiju, to refer to their own mythological creatures. So here's some classic examples, right, of Chinese and Japanese kaiju in the historical context. So, for instance, there's what's known as the Chinese phoenix, which is called the Feng Huang in China, or in Japan, it's called the Ho-Oh, which I believe is the name of a Pokemon.
It is.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, a phoenix type Pokemon
Yep.
from the second generation, I believe.
Yep.
Ho-Ho.
So in the historical context, something like that is a kaiju, right?
Cool.
And but also kaiju includes, so that's like a big creature, right? But kaiju also includes small creatures when you take it into that kind of context, because in Chinese there's a monster that's called like a qilin. In Japanese, they call it a kirin, and it's basically almost like a unicorn dragon type thing that's like about the size of a horse.
Wait, is that the? Don't they have a type of beer called that too?
Yes, and that's probably
Kirin,
yep.
yeah.
That's what it's named after. And-
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
I had
yeah,
no idea. That's awesome.
yeah. And then
Good beer.
I'm pretty sure it is. And
It does have a little beast on it. I mean, I can't.
yeah, if that's
remember off the top of my
the
head,
little
but-
beast that's on it, then that's absolutely what it's referring to. And
okay.
also, kaiju was sometimes used to refer to like fantastical creatures that are real and are kind of granted like a mythological presence. So, like for instance, in Chinese, there's a creature that's called the Baihu, and in Japanese they call it the Byaku, and that's basically just a white tiger. So, like they ascribe mythical properties to white tigers, and going by the historical context, those are kaiju. Those are strange beasts. So you got creatures that are small, you got some that are large, and then you got some that are even technically real, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now,
Go on.
so in the so after 1600 A.D., Japan finished a big civil war that was called Sengoku Jidai, and basically Japan was reunited for the first time in like 200 years, and they went into a period of almost total isolationism until the mid 1800s. So when Japan opens back up to the world, you start getting, people from all over the globe coming in, and part of that is a lot of Western science starts coming in, and Western scholars and, academic schools and all that all start coming to Japan. And one of the things they bring along with them is paleontology, right? So kaiju, they start taking the term kaiju and they start to use it to refer to dinosaurs. So kaiju was also sometimes used to refer to stories of legendary creatures from other parts of the world. So, like, for instance, in Japan, if there was a story about the Loch Ness Monster in a Japanese newspaper, they might use the word kaiju to describe it.
Right.
So, in the 1950s is when you get Godzilla, and the term kaiju gets associated with giant monsters sort of exclusively. But again, dialing the wheel back and looking at the bigger picture, not only is there a root word for it, but on the same end of the spectrum, even though they weren't called kaiju, Japan also has a lot of stories about giant monsters in their mythology. Mm-hmm. So, Japanese mythology is kind of this mix of, you got the island's own indigenous culture, right? And then you also have a bunch of stuff that they borrow from China, but they also borrow from Okinawa and Korea and even sometimes Southeast Asia, and it kind of mixes together. So it's like kind of like a clash of worlds. And in both Japanese and Chinese mythology, there's numerous stories of these large, powerful dragons that they're like forces of nature and gods, right? So if you remember when we talked about the Dragon's Triangle, going all the way back to that episode, there might even be a connection here between, remember how I said that there's, mythology says that there's a dragon that lives beneath the ocean that causes all the storms and all that kind of stuff? So one of the most famous Japanese dragons is a dragon god. His name is Ryujin. And he's the god of the sea, and he brings storms, and he's both the protector of Japan, but he also, when Japan makes him angry, he exacts vengeance upon them with these devastating storms. And he rules under the sea from a palace, and he's got this magical jewel, and he's the king of all other dragons. So, in a way, you can kind of start to see maybe some similarities between, like, him and Godzilla, because you got this literal dragon god that's living under the ocean that's the king of all other monsters, just like how Godzilla is, right? So, there's another story in Japan that's also pretty famous of another gigantic sea monster, kaiju-like beast. This one's called Yamata no Orochi. Usually they just call him Orochi for short. Basically, the story of Orochi, it's about this storm god. He's a humanoid storm god. His name's Susanoo, and he was expelled from heaven one day because he was kind of a dick, right? He was this arrogant asshole kind of god who was always pulling pranks on all the other gods. So they had enough of his shit, and they kicked him down to earth, and they're like, hey, wander earth until you redeem yourself in the eyes of heaven. So while he's on earth, Susanoo, he comes across this elderly couple. They're living at the mouth of the river. And the couple is grieving because for years now, they've been terrorized by this massive 8-headed, 8-tailed sea serpent that's known as Yamata no Orochi. And he's demanded that every 7 years, the couple have to feed one of their daughters to Orochi as a sacrifice. So far they've sacrificed 7 daughters already, right? And now only their youngest remains, and they're literally like days away before they have to sacrifice her too. So Susanoo meets the daughter, and, you know, because it's a classic love story, he just becomes smitten with her at first sight. So he decides, well, I'm going to do what I need to do in order to redeem myself in the eyes of heaven, to protect this family, and, you know, maybe get myself a new waifu in the process. So he decides, this is where it gets a little weird, he decides to turn...
Yeah, this is where it gets...
this is where it gets a little weird.
Yeah, this part.
He decides to turn the girl into a comb that he hides in his hair for her protection so that the monster can't find her. Why he chose a comb, I have no idea.
I mean, maybe he had locks like yours.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Right? So then he comes up with this plan with the old man, and they're going to lure Orochi in by they're going to get a bunch of big batches of liquor, and they're going to get him drunk as fuck.
Hell yeah, brother.
So Orochi comes out of the water, and, you know, he's looking for his sacrifice, but then he sees just all this wine. And he's just like, oh, man, that stuff looks delicious. So he goes to town. He's drinking up all the wine. He gets himself super drunk, and then he passes out. So
Orochi, man, you don't want to just eat that girl in a dry mouth, do you? Check out all this wine, man.
see, he's
Gotta wash it down.
Yeah, you know, you don't want to go in. You don't want to go into a succulent meal so parched. You know, every once in a while, you need to wet the whistles.
She's gonna be screaming and scratching you with her little nails. You gotta drink some wine.
You're gonna drown that out with literal alcohol.
Yeah. So Orochi passed out, right? So Susanoo, he sees his opportunity. He gets his magic sword, and he begins to chop Orochi into like tons and tons of pieces. So he cuts off all of its heads and all of its tails. However, when he starts chopping up Orochi's body, his sword just breaks in half because Orochi's body is like so super tough. But he managed to cut it open just enough that he looks inside, and inside he finds a brand new sword that's even better than his old one. So he uses...
I was hoping you were going to say, like, a brand new Subaru.
brand new Subaru.
A Mazda Miata.
Yeah.
Our special Toyotathon episode.
Today on the show, a brand new Subaru from the belly of a beast.
Fucking Ernie Bach comes out.
Yeah,
starts
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to sell you a Toyota.
So he takes the sword that he magically found in the dragon's body, which lends a lot of credence to RPGs where you kill a dragon and then you find out that he had...
Find a sword.
Yeah, he was carrying like 30 pieces of gold on him somehow, as if he had pockets. So there you go. So yeah, he kills Orochi. He ends up marrying the girl that he saved, and he takes the sword and he gives it as a gift to his sister, who's the goddess of the sun, as kind of like an apology for the actions which got him banished. So here's the fun thing about this kind of story, where I said like how not only is there these giant monster stories in Japan, but there's giant monster stories from all over the world. So there's a lot of similar stories to that story of Orochi that you can find in a lot of other cultures. So here's a famous one that probably most people are at least
Actually,
passingly
before-
familiar with. Yeah.
Before we move on, I got a quick question. Now, did that creature, is that what inspired Rodan? Right? Rodan's the one with the multiple heads.
No,
right?
King Ghidorah. That is actually
Ghidorah.
yes,
Ghidorah.
that is actually the creature who inspired King Ghidorah.
Got it.
Is
Okay,
Orochi.
awesome.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So direct tie-in right there of
Awesome.
creature that inspired very famous kaiju, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a badass kaiju too. I love King Ghidorah. The beast.
Hell yeah, man. So, famous story that people probably are at least somewhat familiar with in passing, that's very similar to the Orochi story, right? Is the story of Hercules and the Hydra. So, if you don't know what a Hydra is, the Hydra in Greek mythology was this
Hail Hydra.
yeah, this
half-
Hell
this
Hydra.
snake-like,
Electric?
dragon-like monster that had multiple different serpent-like heads. That every time you cut one off, it would a new one, two more would grow in its place, right? So Hercules in that story he's a demigod, but he's sort of like this god that's living on Earth, right? And it's his job to slay this water monster because the Hydra in the story lives in water, right? And it's his job to slay this multi-headed water monster that's coming onto Earth and terrorizing people. And also, just like Susanoo in Japan, you got Hercules. He's trying to get his own redemption because in his story, he's pissed off the goddess Hera, who's the wife of Zeus. And Zeus is Hercules' father, but it's one of those things where Hera wasn't his mother. So,
Yeah, the first two stories were about Oklahoma. We're on board.
So, also, Zeus himself actually stars in a similar story where in Greek mythology, Zeus had a big fight with this gigantic water monster that was known as Typhon. And they fought with each other for literally the control of the entire universe. And Zeus actually almost lost to this fucking thing until he decided to zap him with a ton of lightning and actually win. So,
Cheating.
yeah.
Surprised he didn't think of that at first, being the
Yeah, you'd think that would be the first conclusion. Oh, hey, let me use my signature
on a water
move.
monster.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot like a wrestling match, right? Where like every guy has like their signature move, and it's like I don't understand why the Rock just doesn't open with the rock bottom. Why?
You got to build drama, man. You won't have no drama. You don't have a fucking you don't have a show.
So,
Zeus was afraid Vince was going to bust it and be like, "It's fighting for the universe. This match can't be over in a minute and a half. It's for the universe."
Vince McMahon with a steel chair. My God. Oh man,
man.
great wrestling analogy, guys.
So pivoting quickly to another story that's also similar, Norse mythology, which is one of my favorites, right?
Me too.
Has its own, so Norse mythology has its own fair share of giant monsters, from dragons to giants to trolls.
giants.
Yep. So this story stars everybody's favorite Norse god, Thor, the god of thunder and protector of Earth. And
Chris Hemsworth, handsome motherfucker. I
yep.
gotta
So
say.
in this story, feel free to picture Chris Hemsworth as much as you want. So in this story, Thor is, god of thunder, just like Susanoo or just like Zeus, and he's gonna go up against a giant monster that lives underwater. So one day, Thor is out fishing. He's with his friend. He's this giant. His name's Hymir, and Thor is kind of an asshole because Hymir didn't give him any bait. But Thor's like, okay, well, you're not gonna give me bait. I'm gonna go get your largest ox, chop off his head, and use that as bait, you prick. So, Hymir, I guess, was okay with that. And they sail out deep into the sea, and they start fishing for whales. Because, if you're a god with super strength, why are you going to waste your time with bass? So,
Sure, you got a cow, too.
yeah. So Thor casts out his line, and he's waiting, and then suddenly he feels like the strongest bite he's ever felt. And he's having this big struggle with the line, and he's fighting really hard, and he manages to just lift the hole just above the water, and he sees that he's caught Jormungand, who is the world
Oh, I thought you were going to
serpent.
say your mom.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
So Jormungand is this massive sea serpent that lives beneath the sea, and he's so massive that his entire body wraps around the entire earth, and he can bite his own tail in his mouth. So, the key takeaway there is...
Like the Ouroboros.
Yeah,
Yep.
but the key takeaway there is just make a note that the ancient Norse even knew that the earth was round. So...
Suck it, flat earthers.
Fuck you.
So Jormungand rises from the water, his mouth is dripping with venom, and Thor grabs his hammer Mjolnir, and they start going at it, and they're fighting, and, you know, the giant, that's what Thor, Hymir, the thing you gotta know about giants in Norse mythology is the vast majority of them are, like, total pussies, and they're afraid of everything, which is contrary to what you would think with, like, a giant. So, Thor's fighting with the world serpent, and Hymir panics, and he's like, we're gonna die. And he cuts Thor's line, and just as Thor's about to bring his hammer down and kill Jormungand, he slips back beneath the waves, you know, and Thor is rightly kind of like, well, what the fuck, dude? I was just about to kill the damn thing. So, ever since that point, Thor and the world serpent become these bitter enemies in Norse mythology. So at Ragnarok, which is the end of the world in Norse mythology, Jormungand is supposed to rise up from the seas, and him and Thor are going to meet in battle once again, and they're going to fight each other to pretty much a total standstill, and Thor's going to finally kill him. However, after he lands that finishing blow, he's only going to be able to walk about like 9 steps before he dies because of the serpent's venom. So, and then one last quick one that I want to highlight. So here we got Japanese mythology has kaiju-like monsters. Greek mythology has kaiju-like monsters. Norse mythology has kaiju-like monsters. One last one I want to highlight comes from the Old Testament. So in the book of Job...
Here we go.
So
The best part of the Bible,
Yeah.
obviously.
So in the book of Job, Psalm, and Isaiah, there's numerous mentions of this creature known as Leviathan, which is this massive sea serpent that, again, lives beneath the waves. So honestly, my brain goes, why do all these people from all over the world have these similar stories of these gigantic sea serpents living underwater? That boggles my mind. I'm not saying that there's such a thing as that, but just on an anthropological level, I wonder like what the connection is there, or is it really just all these cultures thinking of the
there's
same
huge
thing?
Sea creatures. There's huge sea creatures.
Yeah.
Even today.
Well,
You know, sometimes you might see a whale and think it's a friggin' Leviathan.
Also, for the record, before we get on to Jesus,
Yeah.
for my flat Earth friends, that's how it would work. So there's a flat Earth, and then the serpent could still go around it. The Earth doesn't have
Wow.
to be round.
For anyone
Okay, hey.
that
Just
isn't
saying.
watching the actual video, that is an incredible illustration.
Yeah, Mike just had a great
Circle
illustration. And while we're talking, he
around
drew
another
that.
circle.
Yeah.
mm,
It is
Yeah,
photorealistic.
it was 2 circles. It was two. It was a
I'm-
circle with a ring around it.
I'm classically trained.
a real artiste,
Yeah,
So
he went
anyway-
to to Juilliard for that.
Yeah.
a regular old
Juilliard, my
Michelangelo
neighbor.
over here.
Hey.
He's a party
So the-
dude.
Yeah.
So the Leviathan.
Yeah, eating a pizza.
So Jesus fought a Leviathan?
No, so
That's what you're
well,
saying?
actually,
Jesus
yes,
was in the New
yes
Testament,
and no.
Mike, not the
yes and
Old
no. Wait,
Testament.
I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a little bit. So Leviathan in the Old Testament is this dragon-like monster, breathes fire, lives under the water, and then there's also another gigantic monster whose name is Behemoth, and he's this gigantic ox-like monster, and both of them
Off of the
are
land.
are so physically powerful that the Bible even says like only God Himself could beat them. So during the end times in the book of Revelations in Christianity, right? So when Jesus is supposed to come back, he's supposed to destroy both Leviathan and Behemoth in sort of like that.
Sunday.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ versus the unbeatable Leviathan.
So
Rising from the dead against the Leviathan, Jesus. Sunday.
God can beat them.
So it's just, I don't know, it just fascinates me that you got all these cultures all over the world and from all different places with these stories of, you know, giant monsters underwater. And it's not limited to just the ones I mentioned. There's stories from Native American stories. There's Mesoamerican stories. There's stories from India, stories from Africa, of all this kind of stuff, of these gigantic monsters who are living under the water, who, come up from the water and start wreaking havoc at mankind. And you need something that's almost like another giant monster, like a god, to fight these things off. So,
And if you think about it too, it's like all these locations you mentioned, they're all on the sea. They're
Yeah.
all on the ocean. There's no landlocked. Like, do any landlocked countries have any of this kind of mythology?
Not
or
to-
do they have more desert monsters and
not
stuff like
yeah,
that?
not to my knowledge. Haven't found a single one where it's like a landlocked desert place, and like, let's just say like in the Sahara Desert. Like, haven't found any stories of like, there's giant sandworms. Maybe there are. I don't know. But
There, I think
Mongolian
there are.
deathworm.
Yeah.
The Mongolian deathworm, or like on the desert planet of Arrakis, you have the sandworm.
Melange.
Yes, the melange. Thank you.
So I had heard this thing, and again, I'm too dumb to tie all this together. But when I think about this stuff, I think about, for sure, cave bears, right? When we were crossing over.
Yep.
Yep.
In early human times. Saber-toothed tigers. So animals that are larger than the animals that we have now.
Oh, for sure,
although
for sure.
We do have like 20-something foot sharks. And,
Megalodon.
yeah.
I also had heard that way before, with the dinosaur time, and I don't even know if this was proven or just a theory, but they were saying that the makeup of our atmosphere was different, and the way that the gases and the pressure
Correct,
of it
yes.
or whatever were encouraging to species to actually grow to larger sizes.
Larger, correct.
So just in
specifically
general-
like exoskeleton type of animals.
So
Like
if
bugs.
if there's truth to that, and then you have just statistically larger creatures,
Yeah.
Right.
and then humanity, like whatever survives the extinction events, et cetera, you have like if you have a tribe that's encountering a 30-foot crocodile for the first time, that is going to be a myth for you and your community,
Right.
like moving forward. Probably.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
gossiping about that for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So it all makes sense to me.
Dope.
So yeah, that's my kaiju lore dump for today.
Oh, it's really good. The one thing I wanted to bring up earlier too was when you mentioned Godzilla is also, I mean, there is a bit of inspiration from the Western world in that as well, with the Americans dropping the atomic bomb.
Oh, for
That
sure.
also was a huge inspiration for Godzilla.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, just dealing with that metaphorical monster, the atomic bomb. So
Mm,
it's cool. Yeah, it's cool how Japan. You talked about how Japan kind of wraps all these different cultures. in
Yeah, it
together.
really is like a mixing pot,
Yeah.
like culturally, as far as
Yeah.
like what the influences are there.
Yeah, it's
So-
pretty fucking awesome.
Mm.
You laid it out for us very well. Thank you, Mitch.
Oh,
It was
you're welcome,
amazing.
guys.
You know, Mitch, before we move on to my part here, I've been lucky enough to be like working with Mitch a decent amount recently. And yesterday
Bragger.
at work, shut up, Mike. Yesterday at work, someone said, Mitch, where did they find you? And that, I think, is a very relevant question for, especially after Mitch goes over what he just went over. Like, one day we will be able to have an episode where, we're covering, we're going to cover like weird paranormal things on the show, oddities. One episode will be about Mitch. And we will be able to just go in depth about the lore of Mitch. We'll spend weeks doing research. That's like the final goal for me for this show is to have an episode about Mitch and the lore
Yeah.
surrounding
So,
him.
I want to get it to the point where we're writing fan fiction about Mitch.
Yeah,
Already
fan Mitch.
happened.
Fan
Already
Mitch.
happened.
Yes. Mitchin.
What I feel like is going to happen that feels attainable, but it also feels so powerful that this will have to be something that happens after the end. So the Mitch story would be a revisiting to answer the questions that never got answered. Much like years after the X-Files series ended, they went back to address
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So
Right,
like everybody's older, a little bit more grizzled, but you're finally able to get at the greatest mythological question probably of our lifetimes.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I'm in 100%.
Be the 6-part audiobook. So
Yeah.
for me, I love everything about Mitch, especially what he shares with me in these arenas. But for me, I only knew, like probably a lot of people, about the kaiju stuff from movies.
Yeah.
Like that is where that introduction came in. Godzilla growing up was always fun to build your little towns with blocks and shit, Playmobil, and then kick them over. Ah! Like,
Or smash through your sister's Barbie setup, whatever she had. I used to do that.
Yeah, I
As
used to
Godzilla.
smash your sister's Barbies all the time. But I was wondering if any of you guys know more about like the movie aspect of the kaiju stuff, and like specifically why that probably captured our imaginations growing up.
Yeah, so for me, it was the same, and that was sort of like the avenue that I decided to go down in terms of kaiju, and so I think, and also because it is like from a different culture and from a different language that we speak, here in America in the Western world, that there is sort of like those blurred lines, right, between kaiju meaning like specifically strange beast, but then it also referring to like a genre of films. And you could really go off the rails and mention a million different movies and films that sort of have big monsters in them to a certain extent, right? But I think like when people think of kaiju, they think of, right, we've mentioned him before, but they think of Godzilla.
Yeah.
So like but like usually it's a little bit more generally these big monsters, and they're destroying cities in this movie or fighting other big monsters. And like 1954's Godzilla is commonly considered the first film like within this genre, but before the genre was established, there were movies from beforehand, that predate this 1954 movie. That's sort of like harken to the same thing. So like there's 1925, there was the original Lost World movie.
Yep.
And then you had like the King Kong series that started in like 1933. There was the Son of Kong that came out that same year, 1933. So that's the same sort of idea, but I'm more focusing on the non-Western world and their sort of way of creating this genre and sort of perfecting it in a way over the years, right? So, we sort of mentioned it earlier with the nuclear bombs that were tragically dropped in Japan during World War II with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A lot of the times these big monsters they sort of serve as metaphors in these films for larger issues in society, like the bombs that were being dropped. His association, Godzilla, and his association with like nuclear weapons. Then there are these other popular kaiju characters. We mentioned King Ghidorah. There's Rodan. There's Mothra.
Yep.
But there's a million of them, and they all sort of exist in this same like
Kaiju
world.
universe, you could say.
Kaiju universe. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. And these movies, like specifically in like Japan cinema, have been going on forever. Since 1954's Godzilla all the way until today, and they have sequels and spin-offs and reiterations, and some have sort of have crossed over into the Western media market and is something that like we know now. There's also like subcategories, including like mecha kaiju, right, which are featuring like mechanical or cybernetic characteristics within the actual like kaiju. Then there's like another subcategory of ultra kaiju. They like originate in long-running Ultra series, different franchises. So there's all these like spin-offs and tons of different movies that have like spun from this lore that Mitch was mentioning earlier. The term kaiju is like, it's weird because it's singular and it's plural, and it's like, it represents all of these different things. But more specifically, I think what's interesting is like the techniques that they use to make these movies, and like what was like the sort of term that was developed was called suitmation, right? So a gentleman by the name of Eiji Tsubuyara, he was in charge of the special effects on the Gojira movie. And he sort of pioneered this technique, suitmation, right? So Western monster movies at the time were using a lot of stop motion animation.
Yep.
But in Japan, they were creating human-sized suits, and we've seen this parodied a million times. It's happened in Arrested Development. Someone dressing up. Chappelle Show. Someone dressing up in a big suit and smashing around a miniature city, right?
Yep.
But this was like, at the time, a brand new technology. And so what they would do, they create these human-sized suits. They combine them with miniature models to create the illusion of a giant creature stomping around a city. filming often done at double speed, which so when they play it back at regular speed, it sort of smooths out the stiffness of the rubber and latex suits, especially at the time.
Yeah.
Like back in the 50s and 60s, this is like, I'm sure, like really hot and rubbery,
Yeah,
awful
yeah.
to
And like
be in.
I
the
don't
early
envy the
days of
guy.
CG too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it's so like there was some puppetry that they would use too in this sort of suitmation way of going about things for scenes that might be too tough for the actor to perform. But sort of like Jarvis said, like CG has sort of come into the zeitgeist so much, especially in the last 20, 30 years or so, right? So like 1998's Godzilla movie, the one that we are all so familiar with here, starring Matthew Broderick himself. That was sort of like the first one in the American kaiju market that really sort of started to pioneer CG being used in these movies. But the films that are still produced in Japan, they've continued to use the suitmation technique throughout the years and through all eras of film up
Which is
until this
super
day.
Super dope. I love that. This
And it's it's just a fun way of going about things. Even like the sort of newer movie Shin Gojira, which
Yeah.
I thought was a lot of fun. Like
I
they
love
use
that.
a lot of that sort of mix of CG and humans in suits and miniature cities and
It was almost an homage to those old films too, which I liked.
yeah,
about
it
Shin
really
Godzilla.
was. Which is, like CG has its place. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Revenge of the Sith. Ooh, absolutely. Give me more. But for movies like this, for me, like that pulls at the heartstring for me. It's like I love to see someone dressed up in a dope suit, smashing around a miniature city, fighting with a giant moth. I think that's like what it's all about.
Yeah.
And so.
There's something
know-
really cool about like having like a diorama. Like somebody
Yeah,
had to put time
absolutely.
into building that city, a miniature version of that
Yeah.
city, and also design the suit itself.
Yeah.
Like someone had to put all the detail in that. Yeah, that's all
Yeah.
cool. I love
Like
that.
we've all worked with dioramas before.
Yep.
It's
Oh,
way
yeah.
more fun than shooting on green screen. I
Oh,
think.
absolutely.
Like, green screen has its place, but
Yeah.
a diorama, if you can make it look
Practical
right,
effects.
yeah, practical effects. I think we're all big fans of,
Yes.
and basically been talking a lot of movies, but there's also been TV shows, mangas, novels, comics, video games, you name it.
Oh, yeah,
that
for
have
sure.
had kaiju throughout the years, and I think it's a super popular way of like telling a story using metaphors. And it like continues to thrive. Like, I mean, people talk about Pacific Rim. I think a lot of people probably know the term kaiju from Pacific Rim.
Probably, I would say
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
That was the term that they used in the Western world to sort of talk about these giant monsters that they were fighting with and against, depending on, what movie. Because Pacific Rim Uprising, which is such a hit. But even like the inspiration that these movies have brought, like Steven Spielberg talks about Godzilla ad nauseum and how it like inspired Jurassic Park.
Oh, big time.
He saw it when he was a little kid. He thought it was so masterful. Actually, in Jurassic Park, The Lost World, the second one, they actually show like Japanese businessman fleeing. That's sort of like an homage to this whole genre. So,
I love it.
not only is it popular in its own right, but sort of the influence that it's had throughout the years, I thought was really cool. And you can see it to this day, not in just Japanese movies or not in just specifically kaiju movies, but anything. And as Jarvis has, I mean, right now that looks like a kaiju walking by the street.
The
A
beast
little bit
has
of a
awoken.
miniature. Yeah, but he will grow
Oh,
into
yeah.
a true beast.
Give him a little radiation. It'll blow him
yeah.
up.
I've
So-
honestly never really thought until you guys mentioned it about the connection between the nuclear bombs and like Godzilla specifically.
Yeah.
And like I've just been sitting with that since you mentioned it, and like how incredible that is on so many
Yes.
levels, but also for me, like that is the ideal on a level for art and art.
Yes,
out
I
of-
agree.
Yeah,
art out
totally.
of pain.
Yeah.
To
have
express that
something
pain.
like-
yeah.
Like incredibly, and like even for me to try and make comparisons, as funny as it might be, would be gross. But like what an achievement for humanity to be able to culturally turn one of the most unimaginable horrific things and have it kind of like fungi processing this toxin and have it turn into life.
Yeah,
You know, and
it's
to
become
have,
such
like-
an icon in popular culture.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, that has-
but like
yeah.
for the seeds to come from such pain and such horror, and then to now, luckily, far enough past it where it's not part of like everyone who watched Pacific Rim was more than likely, like the majority of them were not alive for any of these atrocities.
Yeah.
You know, so to have that fruition from something so terrible is just like it's an incredible achievement. You know, whether you think it's hokey, but looking at it from that perspective is like it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, because
I would agree.
Yeah, you say hokey because some of that stuff, you know, a man in a rubber suit smashing around a
Suit,
city
yeah.
sounds silly. It does. But it can be done in a way that you can appreciate. And even if it's done in a way that's a little bit more, say, B-movie-esque, because I
Yeah.
think that's just sort of a term that flies around this genre a lot, that doesn't mean that it's not like an expression of art in a way of
yeah.
like tackling something that is important to tackle and important to talk about in like facing your fears or any sort of way that culture was put down in any sort of way. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and I think it continues to feed and continues to inspire to this day, and so sort of expanding on the idea of Mitch and his lore, let's also put him in a suit of some sort. I'm gonna
Hey,
say
you know?
Mothra suit, but hey, Mitch, you can.
I've always wanted to. Ever since I was a little kid, I always actually wanted to make a giant monster movie. To the point where
Well, let's do it.
I had
Yeah, pretty
when I
much.
was a kid, me and my cousins with like my first video camera, we got a whole bunch of cardboard boxes, and like started like drawing windows on them to and like doors to be like the city. But we never got to the point of actually like filming the monster movie. So that's always
Just smashed them without a camera going.
yeah,
Anyways.
well, no, it was like one of those days where, like, by the time it was all finished, they had to go home, and
Yeah.
it just never happened. So
It's like when you set up all your action figures and never play with them. I used to do that. all the time.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's a real curse that I'm sure many people who have played with action figures have definitely gone through. So, long story short, one of my dreams to make a giant monster movie someday would be awesome. So
I think that could be a documentary within itself too, just covering Mitch trying to make a monster movie. I think is a movie in itself. I think we could absolutely make some amazing stuff out of this.
Yeah, other than the pandemic, why?
Yeah.
we fucking, as far as I'm concerned, we have to make this happen.
Yeah, it has to.
We have to make.
I'm
this
all in. I'm all in.
Also, long story short, title of Mitch's sex tape. Inspiring other types of media. You know, we mostly talked about movies, but there's also like literature that's inspired by it, right? And so I think Jarvis is going to expand on, a giant monster that a lot of people are familiar with, and I think was like directly sort of inspired by this whole thing, right?
Absolutely. And going back to like what Mitch said about the sea creatures, I mean, this guy is in Western, I mean, at least in America, like this is like one of the sea monsters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
And that's the Cthulhu. I'm sure
Hell yeah.
most people know who this creature is, created by Mr. Lovecraft in 1928. It's a giant, I don't know, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know who it is, it's basically a giant humanoid with big dragon wings and a big octopus head with big drenching tentacles hanging out of his mouth. And to this day, I mean, he's inspired zillions and zillions and zillions of characters since then. Like even Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean? Like took a huge inspiration from that. And the funny thing is, like when H.P. Lovecraft created this creature, he didn't really give like a very deep description. Everything you see of Cthulhu is kind of what people's interpretations. Like I think there's one drawing out there that he had done from way back, but it's like very crude and kind of just gives you like the base look of what he is. And it always has the tentacles. That's always the number one feature that he has. And a lot of times, like I've seen versions that are like a mollusk head or like a squid head, and it kind of changes around, but it's always got the tentacles around the mouth and just looks so badass. But the way that that Lovecraft described it is since going back, he had such a masterful way of writing that he was able to describe this creature in like, what is it, one sentence, and basically has created this an image of a monster that is permeated all popular culture, especially like Stephen King and his son Joe Hill. They all get big inspiration. But I want to read the description that H.P. Lovecraft gave, which is actually I think it's in the very beginning of Call of Cthulhu. But I have an excerpt here. It says, creatures described as a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head, whose face was a mess of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and fore feet, and long, narrow wings behind. And that's all you got for the description of what Lovecraft created. And if going through the history of pulp culture, if you look, it's like there's so many different versions of that description that he made, and I love that about it. I kind of love how he's created this creature that was so evil and so menacing that just a light description could kind of burn its way into everyone's memory for 1928,
100 years.
almost 100 years.
Right.
Yeah. Still going
it's very
strong too.
It's very good. It's really fucking cool. And what I like about this kaiju is that he kind of played more upon psychology than other kaijus, like Japanese kaiju monsters. Whereas this creature would live under the sea, and one day he would come up just to annihilate all of the human race, and just the mere sight of him would make you go mad. And H.P. Lovecraft, if you're not familiar with any of his work, is notorious for his kind of psychological cosmic horror, where it's people losing their minds and going insane, and just imagery that you can't even look at because it just makes you go mad. And that's kind of always been the theme in most of his stories. But yeah, so the other fascinating thing, like kind of like how Godzilla had his rogue gallery per se, like the Mothra, King Ghidorah, all that stuff. Cthulhu also had a cast of characters that kind of surrounded him, and those were referred to as the Old Ones. And throughout his writing, he would always refer to the Old Ones. And if anyone's ever read At the Mountains of Madness, basically an expedition team goes into the mountains. Where is this? South America? I can't remember. I read it so long ago. I think it was South America.
Antarctica, wasn't it?
Yeah, so they find these mountains, they go digging in, they find these old ones, these gods, and they come to life and basically wreak havoc on humanity. And all the expedition guys go insane, and they all end up at a very shitty demise. But I just think like it's fascinating, like taking what Mitch said, like all that mythology that's been around for centuries, and seeing how kind of H.P. Lovecraft put like a very modern spin on it. I mean, I know it was 1928, but he kind of he tapped into the psyche, which I feel like the old stories didn't really do. And I think that's why it makes his style of writing, his style of horror, is like some of the most masterful, because he was able to tap into the mind and really something that we all deal with. We all have a psyche and everything, but he kind of put it on in words. Like the way you read his books almost make like you feel like you're losing your mind. And it's such a fascinating style of writing that he created. And it was a very short time. He only wrote, I want to say less than 10 years, because he died in 1933, I think. We won't go deep into H.P. Lovecraft because he was a horrible person.
Yeah,
went crazy.
Not exactly the biggest role model.
Yeah,
he got high on his own supply.
He did. He really did. He was an anti-Semitic. He was racist. He was awful.
Yeah.
But his writing is incredible, and it's inspired everyone for 100 years now. More than 100 years. And it's fascinating. He's such a cool monster. When I think of like an Americanized giant monster, I instantly go to Cthulhu.
I would agree.
I completely forgot about King Kong until you mentioned it.
We had King Kong.
I completely
too.
forgot that was a
But,
thing that existed.
Cthulhu does predate King Kong,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool.
Dude,
by a little
Gosh,
Dude,
Rick,
forget-
it's got tentacles on its face, and I don't know.
God.
Shut up, Morty. We're gonna fight it anyway. We're gonna get it with a death ray. Oh, I don't know, Rick. Can't I just go see my parents? There's cut it. It's an episode.
Cronenberg to Morty. Oh God.
Yeah, God, yeah.
But yeah,
I just think, why
I'm
not
sorry, go
Zoidberg, right? Why not Zoidberg?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Zoidberg,
Zoidberg,
the
another
Ood.
inspiration.
The Ood is like a villain from Doctor Who. Look very similar
Yep.
with the tentacles on the mouth.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can
You know,
find it everywhere,
so
and
cool.
also a lot of times you'll hear it described. You'll hear creatures described as like fish-like with like fish eyes,
Yep, yep.
a fish head. A lot of that time, it's a lot of inspiration from Lovecraft, who actually had an immense fear of the ocean, and
Yeah.
that's what kind of drove his fascination with these creatures that lived under the ocean and just slept and slumbered. And
Yeah. Creepy.
so yeah, that we could. I mean, I don't want to go into Lovecraft's life, but I mean, there is a lot of fascinating stuff about his psychology that you can see in his writing. But I'll let you guys kind of dig into that.
Yeah.
Find that out for yourself. But yeah.
Or that could be
and
another
the other thing, the other
episode.
big thing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That could be another episode moving around because they do a Lovecraft Fest in Providence, Rhode Island, which is within 3 hours of all of us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as long as we don't
every
talk
couple
about his
years?
anti-Semitism, I think, and we just talk about just his writing, I think we'll be okay.
Well, we can talk about how bad it was, and we
Yeah.
can learn from it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
because, like,
absolutely, absolutely.
we're better
Refer-
than that.
I
yeah.
feel like that's the
Refer to him
approach
as a
that you
piece of
should
shit.
take. Is
Yeah,
personally,
be like this piece of shit wrote some pretty
Right.
great books.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, the other big thing I forgot to tap into is telepathy, which was a huge power that Cthulhu had. He was able to drive you mad on purpose. Like he
Yeah.
could drive himself into your head and make you go crazy, not just by looking at him, which is also very interesting angle that you don't really see with giant monsters, you know? And the
Right.
other thing is, too, like you think about, I mean, I don't have a description of his height, but he always was referred to as like a gigantic monster. So you could imagine this thing coming out of the ocean and
Yeah.
just taking up the entire horizon, all you can see. And as you're looking at him, you're just going mad. And
Yeah.
that is so fucking cool. Because that
That
is
is
like,
so cool.
you think of something on the horizon, you just think this giant creature, and
yeah.
it's very, it's
I
so
mean, the
fascinating
simple
to me.
truth there is that no one has ever really seen a living creature that large, ever.
Yes.
Like, I think anyone who would see a creature that large, if you've never seen something like that before, would make you go, it would fry your brain. Your brain
Yeah.
wouldn't be
you
able
might
to
not
handle
even
it.
register it.
I think there's absolute truth behind that writing of, like, if that scenario was to occur, that's exactly what you would happen
Yeah.
to any normal human being.
I like to imagine that, like, when he was writing the Call of Cthulhu, he was probably sitting somewhere in Rhode Island, looking out over the ocean, and that he just saw it. Like,
Yeah.
that was in his mind's
Right,
eye.
right.
He saw the creature
Right.
coming out, and that's cool. Like, that's cool.
Like
as
out of
hell.
the fog, out of the clouds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And we all, all of us growing up in New England, we can all kind of imagine. That's the other thing too. All his stories take place in New England, so we can all kind of imagine what the settings are. I mean, a lot of his stories are in Mass. They're in Rhode Island,
Yep.
Maine. He jumps all around, but
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
it's cool to be in this part of the country and being able to kind of relate to his settings. You know, like I go down
Yeah,
the
it
Cape.
is cool.
I go down the Cape or Gloucester or whatever, and I think of the Dunwich Horror, like the way he described
Yep.
that town in Massachusetts. I think it was Arkham, right? Arkham,
Yeah,
Mass.
yeah.
I think was where
Arkham,
that story
Mass.
takes place.
Yep.
Which is in Batman. Has inspired Batman.
Yep,
I mean,
that's
fucking
where the name
Arkham
comes
Asylum is from Lovecraft. Lovecraft Country. If anyone hasn't watched that yet, it's an incredible TV show, which is kind of its own thing. But the author himself is kind of in this universe. Like Lovecraft is
Right.
a thing. It's a place, which is very, very fascinating. But one last thing I want to read before we move on and let Mike kind of take the show is he had another quote from the Call of Cthulhu that I wanted to read that is pretty cool in his kind of description, I guess, which says, "The thing cannot be described. There is no language for such abysms of shrieking and immemorial lunacy. Such eldritch contradictions of all matter, force, and cosmic order. A mountain walked or stumbled." It's just like the coolest,
I love
coolest
that.
way to
I
kind
love
of build
the
imagery.
mountain walked or stumbled.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the coolest thing is because he left it up to your
Yeah,
imagination.
your mind fills
To,
in
like,
the blanks.
create. Yeah, and that mystery is what is to me has always been so enticing about Cthulhu and like the old gods. Is it's like, no, they're so fucking unimaginable because they will melt your brain if you
Literally.
actually try to imagine like what they are as a deity, like as a beast, because they're more than just like a physical form. Like, you know, like you said, they affect you in the physical visual way, which we are all so familiar. Well, most of us are fortunately so familiar with, right? Being able to see things and experience life in that way. But like when you think about this, the psychology behind it and like the way that it will melt your fucking mind, it's just like it's another level. It truly is another level.
It's from such a foreign place that your senses can't handle it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
And that
so
is
That's a
like,
great way to put it.
whoa, fucking mind blowing.
And I think Stephen King has a very good grasp on that too in his writing, especially with like the character of Pennywise, because that Pennywise is being
Pennywise
compared
is
to an
so
old god.
Lovecraftian in
Yeah,
the sense of.
right, it's an
big
old god.
time.
Yes.
Yep. Because you know, that creature, it manipulates itself to become your greatest fear, and that's everything that Lovecraft talked about in his stories. Everything fear in the human mind, and it was, oh man, Stephen King. If you like Lovecraft, you gotta love Stephen King. They all kind of play off each other. Their inspirations are all so so interesting and entertaining. And I actually lied. I have one more quote that I want to read. That actually goes with that last quote.
Oh, geez, Jarvis might as well just read us the whole book at this point.
I know, I should have. It was too long,
joking,
and I'm a
I'm
bad
joking,
reader,
but-
so it would be
Nah, it's
awful
fine,
to
it's
listen to me
fine, I'm
read.
joking.
But
Go ahead.
this last quote, I'm going to leave you with guys with this. It says, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents." And that right there
That's
kind of
cool.
summarizes
It's so cool.
all of his madness and how weak the human mind is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to just talk about Cthulhu for like years and years, but we do have a show to get on with.
Yeah, so let me just say one thing.
Of course.
Forget this fucking King Kong versus Godzilla nonsense. Where the fuck is Godzilla versus Cthulhu?
Oh, dude, I'd be so into that.
Hold on a second, I'll get him.
Cthulhu, is that you?
Now,
Hey, Cthulhu, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Now, would Cthulhu use his cultists to kind of like fight?
2020,
Well, I don't know, it'd
Cthulhu
be,
has been canceled.
It'd be interesting because you could have that because like Godzilla always has like that human element too of like whether it's the Japanese Defense Force or whether it's fucking Mechagodzilla or Jet Jaguar, right?
Yeah.
So you could have like the human element with Cthulhu and the human element of Godzilla going up against each other with like the cultists and stuff. But then you could also have just like fucking Godzilla and Cthulhu duking it out, on the shore, on the coastline of Tokyo or whatever, going to town against each other in the Battle of the Titans. Because like, honestly, who could stand up to Cthulhu if not Godzilla? Like, I feel like he'd be our best shot.
I agree, and I think you have a great idea there. And I don't think we should post this because we should copyright it before they.
Just bleep
Even
all
though it's
that
already owned.
45 seconds out. Let's just bleep it out.
I would actually love that because then you would have, like you said, you would have the human element.
Yeah.
So you could tell a very relatable human story between like these evil cultists and the humans, and then you have the big monsters, and they're the fight. Yeah. Oh man,
Yeah.
that's a great idea. I am all for that. I wish I had $1 billion to fund that right now. And buy the licenses.
Write it down and mail it to yourself because that's what keeps it safe.
Oh, the copyright. Yeah, copyright.
Yeah, the copyright law because the USPS is so solid.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's clear that like the idea of kaiju and sort of the basis that like Mitch was talking about has just like inspires and it continues to inspire.
Yeah.
And it seems to be like there's a lot of things that we are familiar with, but then there are probably some that are way more on the periphery that we're not familiar with, right? Like there's got to be some weird kaiju out there that's just like something that we've never heard of, or maybe some people have heard of and are super into, but it's just like necessarily hasn't tapped into the zeitgeist. I keep saying the term zeitgeist. I like saying it, but you can say it too much.
Yeah,
It's good. It's like
It gets
a
tossed
God
around a lot.
zeitgeist.
Yeah.
It gets tossed around a lot. But
I looked up
think-
giant frogs.
yeah,
was my
giant
shit.
frogs. That's what I want to
That
know
was my
more
shit.
about. Is shit
Yeah,
like
I've been
that.
I've been
shit.
eagerly awaiting this story, so by all means.
Yeah, I didn't really find much, unfortunately. But
That's
I was
okay.
surprised by what I found. because I was just limited to like Godzilla shit, but I always liked that stuff growing up, guys in suits. I've had the pleasure and privilege of getting to help Big Nazo Lab out of Rhode Island a couple times that are like the epitome of that. They have these giant monster costumes that they put on regularly, do events and stuff. Yeah, super fun. My favorite giant thing, so we started talking about kaijus. Like personally for me, I was way into this, I guess, extremely popular Japanese cartoon called Naruto when I was in college. I guess 15 years ago.
Never
now
heard
already.
of her.
It's called Sexy no Jutsu. But in
that joke was so good
the
it gave
main
me corona.
character has a teacher who has like a pact with frogs or toads. I don't know. They're friends.
Yeah.
And the toads have taught him to fight, and one of the teachers is this giant kaiju toad that he can like summon and ride. And I always used to get so fired up when that thing would come on the show because it brings the extra element to it. You know, you have your we're the Power Rangers, right?
Mm-hmm.
The
The
Super
Megazord.
Sentai dudes. So
Yeah,
it'd be
the
one
Zords.
thing when they were fighting and like that's cool, they're doing ninja kicks, explosions, people are doing backflips. But
Yeah.
when they called their giant robots in, that was
Hell
the
yeah.
escalation.
Yeah.
That was always taking it up a level.
Yep.
So in this cartoon, they would have like encounter an enemy that they couldn't beat on their own. They had to summon this giant toad to help out, and I always thought that was the coolest. Like if I had to choose a giant kaiju to ride around in, as cool as the robots are, and as much as I like technology, I'm going with the giant toad. I just thought it was the
Yeah.
coolest shit. So I got fired up when we started doing this. I was like, I'm gonna look into that. That's my favorite thing. I want to know, does it come from any ancient history? You know, it's like, are Japanese giant toads a thing? And when I was looking into it, I was surprised to find there wasn't that much culturally like what I was expecting. And what I ended up finding for giant toads in history came from the OG test, as I like to call it, or the Old Testament.
The old, yes. The old, welcome down by the Old Testament. You know, you're
Take a
going
left at the
down.
test.
I'm going to check out the Old Testament.
So this went specifically. All right, the first thing I found out, this dude Steve_Lieber on Twitter.
Wow, the sources are just getting really good here.
I had to go far. This wasn't like in.
Jarvis talked about CNN earlier, and now we're at Twitter handles.
No, that was
so
Mike,
there we
wasn't
go.
it? Mike was talking about CNN.
I was-
Oh,
the
Mike was
CNN guy.
CNN. Yeah, wow, Mike,
Bring
you're
it
really
around.
running the gamut. Yeah.
I'm circling the flat Earth with my serpent and biting my own tail.
From CNN to Twitter.
Earth is
I
a
looked at
disc.
the Kaiju wiki, and like there were only a couple of frogs that came up on that, and it was like, nothing really meaty that I was looking for. It was some dude who was like in a shopping center uniforms with stripes with like a frog head. I don't know. Anyway, that's how I found this Twitter. But I couldn't find any like the big frog
Yeah,
head that
yeah,
people
yeah.
get, like leave
Right.
out tadpoles and shit as a tribute. Couldn't find any of that stuff. But I found this dude that wrote, "It's been years since I observed Passover, but I keep thinking about the midrashic interpretation of the 10 plagues from the Bible, in which the plague of frogs was actually just one giant kaiju frog." So I was like, what? So I started looking into that, and on myjewishlearning.com, I discovered that there was one interpretation of the Bible. So like this has happened hundreds of times, or whatever. There are these ancient religious texts. Some scholar will publish it again with their notes in that are like, this is our interpretation of it. And sometimes those scholars happened so long ago that entire followings evolved around the scholar itself. So now we are human beings that will change our lives because of this person's interpretation of this ancient text.
Yeah, thanks,
with-
King James.
It's fucking wild. It's wild how this stuff works.
Yeah.
So the Midrash, I'm apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I've never heard any of these out loud. So they, or whoever this person's interpretation, in the Bible, when they're talking about these plagues, there was a grammatical irregularity that they called. So rather than the plural of frogs, the instance of it uses, let me find the words. So the original text uses the singular sephardia, if I'm saying that right, frog, rather than the plural sephardim, frogs. So it says, the frog came up and covered the land of Egypt.
Wow.
Interesting.
And then, so like that picture right there is
Right.
wild, right?
Right.
And then if you're a literalist and you're taking the Bible as it's God's word and this is all it is, then like there was a giant frog that just showed up in Egypt. So that's, other than the Nile, Egypt's landlocked, right? So then after the frog shows up, everybody starts going like, holy shit, there's a giant frog, and they go to attack it because they feel in danger, whatever.
Yeah.
Doesn't specify that the frog did anything to deserve this other than existed.
Right.
And then as they're attacking it, that is when the frogs plural happen. So that by attacking the problem head on, there's a multiplication of the problem itself on a smaller scale, which ends up being worse. And then that's where the Midrashic interpretation takes this further to say what it's trying to say is by immediately attacking the problem that's in front of you, you end up making smaller, worse problems throughout that affect more people rather than this problem that seems enormous, but maybe that frog just wanted a high five or train you in Kung Fu.
Damn.
That was my shit. So I looked that up. I thought that was pretty cool.
I've
There's
never
a
heard
giant
the
kaiju frog in the Bible, depending on whether you want to go by that interpretation of it.
Well, anyone
But I think it's
listening who wants to and is good at drawing, please draw us how you would interpret that scene. I would love.
I
to
would
see
love
that
to
giant
see
frog.
an artist's interpretation of, a gigantic frog kaiju just in, ancient Egypt, circa the Prince of Egypt or whatever that movie was called with the DreamWorks.
Jake Gyllenhaal.
Yeah, the DreamWorks movie, right? Just like that animation style, right? Just a picture of like the giant frog just, amongst the city with like the Pharaoh's men just like in the foreground all panicking. Like I think that would be an awesome picture.
Yeah, I agree.
What if the frog hops up to the Sphinx and it's like, hey, where are you from? You come around here often?
Yeah.
Sort of starts hitting on the
That-
Yeah,
Sphinx.
and then he
But
pulls
this
out
is
a
the
top hat
fucking
and a
Sphinx,
cane.
right?
And he's like, hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
So WB Frog just got a top hat
Yeah.
and a cane.
Yeah, so anyone that wants to do that, BeastieBoysParanormal@gmail.com. Send us, if you're listening to this and you have something to draw, please send us something.
Yeah, let us be
But
your
what about the
muse.
Sphinx? The Sphinx.
Sphinx. Yeah, what about the Sphinx?
What if it was representative of an actual beast that size?
That'd be sick.
Yeah.
What if the Sphinx was like an intelligent creature that posed for that?
Yeah.
What if inside the Sphinx is the mummified version of the Sphinx and it's actually that big?
What if it's just an
Wow.
You go in it
shell?
though. Can't you go in the Sphinx?
I don't know.
What was that?
Haven't they been in the Sphinx?
No, I think that.
Yeah, I think
it's
there are tunnels in
underneath
it. and
Have you
stuff.
been in the Sphincter?
I don't think.
Oh, that was very Egyptian what you did.
Yeah, this cat is not. He wants his butthole all over this fucking podcast.
Good.
Most
Where it
cats do.
belongs.
Yeah, they're assholes. So I think that about wraps
Wow.
it up, right, Mike? That's it
Kaiju.
for
Yeah,
your
that's
frog
all I
story?
got.
That's rad.
Frogs, baby.
That was awesome.
I like the
One-
frog.
Yeah,
Giant frog in the Bible.
I think we covered some cool shit today.
Yeah,
Mm.
me too. Very similar to Cthulhu. I'm just trying to. I'm really trying to picture that frog, and I do
Yeah.
think.
I just
Yeah.
picture the Naruto frog in
Yeah,
Egypt.
yeah, I see that.
I can't draw, otherwise I'd draw it in a heartbeat. But I would love to see if someone could come up with something cool.
Yeah, I would love to see anybody's interpretation of that has artistic
Yeah.
ability.
Yeah, that'd be rad.
I want a giant
Oh.
frog comic strip that it depicts. The first one is the hitting on the Sphinx, but then we
The
sort of expand
ideal,
on it.
though,
Hey, how you
and if
doing?
if we had a budget for the show, we should pay somebody to do this, but we don't. But we can imagine it. Is to have someone with a pet frog build the miniature set.
Yes, there it is.
Can we
Full
get-
circle.
Can we get Larry on the horn? He could build that city
Yeah.
in a heartbeat.
So if you have a pet toad and you want to make a teeny tiny little Egypt, do it.
Yeah, that's a shout out to Larry Sampson, by the way.
Do it. Do it.
Shout outs.
do it.
Oh, I got another shout out. Can we do a quick shout out right now?
Sure.
You
just
Oh yeah, let's just play the shout out. Mike, can you? I know you have the shout out sound queued up. Could we just play that real quick, Mike?
It's a shout out. Shout
Thank you,
out.
Mike. Thank you.
Beastie Boy shout out.
So this was a mere coincidence, but Stenning and I wore our Carnivora shirts today, so I'd like to give them a little shout out on our show. I know they all listen to it. I know at least Cody does. Great band from Salem, Massachusetts. But yeah, I had to give them
Which
a shout
city,
out.
bitch? Which city?
Which city?
But yeah, that's my shout out.
Yeah,
That's all
hell
I
yeah.
got. So
This has been a shout out. Wop, 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 wop.
Oh, I didn't realize that you also made an outro for the shout out segment. Thanks.
Yeah, I didn't. You get so angry when I forget the outros. I was like, I don't want to fuck around this time.
I get it. Doesn't take much to make me angry. Thank you.
Yeah,
So
I know.
thank
You're
you
like,
for
if you're gonna do an
remembering
intro, you do an
Thank
outro.
you.
What are you just gonna leave
Yeah.
someone who's Penguin Man? You call me
that.
Penguin
Yeah,
Man.
because then if it was just an intro without an outro, it would just
makes
be
sense.
a tro.
I
It
was
would just
in
be
the
a
wrong.
tro.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
admitting to it. I was in the
Yeah.
wrong. I'm not gonna make that mistake again.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Thank you.
well, anyways,
you
yeah,
for
that's
putting
our
up with
show.
me.
Ends in an argument.
That was an apology.
All the
That
best
was an
shows
apology.
do.
yeah.
Apology.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks
You know,
everybody
miss
for
you
listening to
guys.
this.
I missed
Earlier,
you guys a lot.
Jarvis, you mentioned our email. If you want to reach out to us, right? beastieboysparanormal@gmail.com. We also, in terms of the time stream where we're at now, we sort of recently started an Instagram account, which is also Beastie Boys Paranormal. Is that correct?
Yep. Yep. It's all the same.
Yeah.
Yes,
And as
please.
always, ratings and reviews are nice and important to have wherever
And
you listen to
follows.
the show.
Give us follows.
Follows.
And follow
Yeah,
our YouTube
so-
page too, because we've been uploading the
That's right.
videos onto
Yeah.
the YouTube. Which
Beastie
you can also
Boys Paranormal Adventures. Yeah.
Yep. And also
Sorry.
our website, beastieboysparanormal.com, right? No adventure in there, I think. I don't think, right?
Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, give yourself an hour off too. You've earned it. You've been through a fucking lot.
There you go.
If
yeah.
you could do it the next episode, or even whenever you want. If you could find a free hour for yourself,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
don't have
For
to
sure.
do anything. You don't have to get projects done. You just take some time,
Right.
feel good in your own body.
Yeah, have
And
fun
if-
with it.
Just enjoy. it.
If you watch the video feed, you can see, much like the minds of readers of H.P. Lovecraft, Mike slip into the darkness.
Yeah, you've been fading
because
into the darkness.
He has been
Progressively
fading into
drifting
darkness.
into the
Yeah,
My
void.
since
sunglasses, I don't think, are helping.
Since I talked in the old tongue, and I'm
Yeah,
not
exactly.
really cool
Yeah.
how it's happening.
Yeah.
That's a,
Right.
it's
I
the shadow of
did the-
Cthulhu over him.
I did the voice, and
The
now
bottom of your
everything's
face
getting
has
real dark.
disappeared. Yeah,
here.
that's right.
And I don't want to die.
Understandable.
Well, yeah, guys, great show. Till next time.
Yeah. Till next
Till
time.
next time.
All right. I love you all.
Love you
Bye,
boys.
everybody.
Bye.
Good night, guys.
Okay. I'm going to cut
Okay.
my stuff.
Same.